The rain hammered against the windows of the small Veterans Hall in Portland, Maine, where 23 former servicemen sat in folding chairs, half listening to another Monday night meeting about benefits and bureaucracy. Most of them were checking their phones, waiting for the coffee break. Then the door opened. An old man stepped inside, water dripping from his worn peacoat. He must have been in his 90s, but he moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned long ago that every step mattered. His eyes swept the room once, cataloging faces and exits, before he removed his flat cap and shook off the rain. Nobody recognized him. Captain Marcus Webb, the meeting organizer and former Marine, glanced at his roster. No new names. He walked over to the stranger with his hand extended. "Welcome, sir. I'm Marcus Webb. Don't think I've seen you at our meetings before." The old man's handshake was firm, his palm calloused. "James Whitmore. Just moved to town last month. My granddaughter thought I should get out more." British accent. Faint, but unmistakable. Marcus guided him to an empty chair near the front. The meeting droned on for another 40 minutes. When it finally ended, most of the veterans headed straight for the exit, eager to beat the storm home. But a few lingered around the coffee station, and Marcus noticed young Tommy Reeves, a kid who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan, standing near Whitmore. Tommy had that look, the one that said the transition back to civilian life wasn't going well. "You know what kills me?" Tommy was saying to another vet, loud enough for half the room to hear. "They spend millions training us to shoot, then tie our hands with rules of engagement that get our brothers killed. I had shots I couldn't take because of protocol. Good shots. And men died because I followed orders." Several heads nodded. It was a common frustration. Whitmore said nothing, just sipped his terrible coffee. "I'm serious," Tommy continued, his voice rising. "They teach you one way to shoot, one position, one doctrine, and if you deviate even slightly, they pull you off the line. Like there's only one right answer in combat." Marcus moved to intervene, but Whitmore spoke first, his voice quiet but carrying. "There rarely is only one right answer in combat, son." Tommy turned, noticing the old man for the first time. "With all due respect, sir, were you in the service?" Whitmore set down his cup. "British Army. Sniper. Long time ago." Tommy's defensive posture softened slightly. "Any combat?" "Some." "Where?" "France. Belgium. Germany." Whitmore's eyes grew distant. "Other places we weren't supposed to talk about then, and I still don't much now." Marcus felt the room's energy shift. Even the veterans who had been halfway out the door stopped. Tommy pressed on. "So you get it then. The stupid rules. The by-the-book mentality that ignores reality." Whitmore was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Finally, he spoke. "I once developed a shooting position that my commanding officer said was impossible. Impractical. Dangerous. They forbade me from using it." "What kind of position?" someone asked. Whitmore looked around at the faces now watching him. Young and old. Different wars, different decades, but the same questions in their eyes. "I called it the mill wheel position, named after the old water mills back home in Yorkshire. You'd lie on your back, feet braced against something solid, rifle upside down, shooting between your boots. Gave you angles nobody expected and made you nearly invisible from most vantage points." "That's insane," Tommy said. But there was curiosity in his voice now, not anger. "It was unorthodox," Whitmore agreed. "And my superiors hated it. Said it violated every principle of marksmanship they'd ever taught. They threatened me with court-martial if I used it in the field." "Did you?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Whitmore's eyes met his. "In March of 1945, in a town whose name I can't even pronounce anymore, 11 German soldiers died in 8 minutes because I ignored that order." The room went completely silent except for the rain drumming on the roof. Tommy leaned forward. "What happened?" Whitmore stood up slowly, his joints protesting. "That young man is a longer story. One I haven't told in 70 years. He looked at Marcus. "You have meetings every Monday?" "Every Monday," Marcus confirmed. "Then perhaps next week, if you'll have me back, I'll tell you about the day they finally understood why some rules exist to be broken." He put his cap back on and walked toward the door. Before he left, he paused and looked back at Tommy. Your instincts in combat weren't wrong, son. The guilt you carry for shots you didn't take, that's harder than anything you might have done. Trust yourself. You earned that right. Then James Whitmore disappeared into the rain, leaving 23 veterans staring after him, wondering who exactly had just walked into their Monday night meeting. The following Monday, the Veterans Hall was packed. Word had spread. 23 had become 47, with veterans driving in from as far as Boston and Burlington. They filled every chair and lined the walls, waiting. James Whitmore arrived exactly at 7, shaking rain from the same peacoat. His eyes widened slightly at the crowd, but he said nothing, just took the seat Marcus had saved for him up front. The formal meeting lasted 15 minutes. Nobody cared about the agenda. When Marcus finally said the words they were all waiting for, the room leaned forward as one. Mr. Whitmore has agreed to share his story tonight. The old sniper stood, slower than last week, and Marcus noticed the tremor in his left hand that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and he'd just hidden it better. March 1945, Whitmore began, his voice steady despite his shaking hand. I was 22 years old and had been a sniper for the British Army for 2 years. By then, I'd seen things that would have broken the boy I'd been. We all had. He paused, his jaw tightening. My partner was a Scotsman named Callum Ross. Best spotter I ever worked with. We'd been together since North Africa. He could read wind like it was speaking to him, could spot movement in shadows that didn't exist. We were good. Very good. Tommy raised his hand slightly. When did you develop the Millwall position? Winter of 44. We were pinned in a bombed-out church outside Bastogne. Germans had the high ground, standard positions were suicide. I was on my back behind rubble, trying to stay warm, when I realized I had a sight line between 2 chunks of stone if I shot upside down. I braced my feet against a collapsed beam and took the shot. Dropped a German machine gunner at 400 yards. The room was silent. Callum thought I'd lost my mind. But it worked. Over the next few weeks, I refined it, practiced it, used it 3 more times successfully. Each time, it gave us an advantage nobody anticipated. What did your superiors say? Marcus asked. Whitmore's expression darkened. When they found out, they were furious. My lieutenant, a man named Prescott, pulled me into his tent and told me I was making a mockery of British military tradition. Said I was setting a dangerous example for other soldiers who might start improvising and getting themselves killed. He ordered you to stop, Tommy said quietly. He did more than that. Whitmore's voice dropped. He threatened to charge me with insubordination if I ever used that position again. Said next time I'd be court-martialed and sent home in disgrace. In front of the entire unit, he humiliated me. Called me a cowboy. Said I thought I was special because I'd gotten lucky a few times. What did you do? I saluted. Said yes, sir. And I meant it. Whitmore looked down at his shaking hand. I had no intention of ever disobeying that order. I'd been raised to respect authority, to follow the chain of command, even when I disagreed. But someone prompted. Whitmore lifted his eyes, and there was something dark there, something that had never fully healed. But then we got to Hirschberg, and everything changed. Hirschberg was barely a town anymore. Just ruins and corpses and the smell of cordite that never left your nostrils. We arrived on a Tuesday morning, March 13th. I remember because it was my sister's birthday back home. Whitmore's voice grew quieter, and every man in that room leaned in to hear. Our objective was simple. Secure a bridge on the eastern edge so Allied tanks could cross the river. Intelligence said light resistance. A few scattered German units in retreat, demoralized and undermanned. Intelligence was wrong. He paused, reaching for the glass of water Marcus had placed beside him. We walked into a trap. 70 British soldiers against what turned out to be over 200 entrenched Germans who'd been waiting for us. They had machine gun nests, mortars, the high ground. Within 10 minutes, we'd lost half our men. The room was absolutely still. Outside, a car horn blared in the distance, but nobody moved. Lieutenant Prescott was hit in the first wave. Not killed, but bad enough. He was screaming orders from behind a destroyed truck, blood pouring from his leg. We were pinned down on all sides. Every time someone moved, German rifles cut them down. Whitmore's hand shook harder now, and he gripped the back of the chair in front of him. Callum and I were trapped in a collapsed building, 30 yards from where the lieutenant was bleeding out. We could see 11 German positions from where we lay. 11 shooters picking off our boys like it was target practice. And I had the angle. The perfect angle if I used the mill wheel position. Tommy's voice cut through. But you'd been ordered not to. Whitmore nodded slowly. I looked at Callum. He looked at me. And I could see boys dying in the street. Boys younger than me. 19, 20 years old. I could hear them screaming for their mothers. His voice cracked slightly. Callum said 3 words to me. He said, "Do it, Jamie." So I did. Whitmore straightened up, and despite his age, despite the tremor in his hand, he suddenly looked like the soldier he'd been 80 years ago. I got on my back, braced my feet against a support beam, turned my rifle upside down and found my first target through the scope. A German machine gunner firing from a second-story window. First shot. Down. I worked the bolt, adjusted. Second target. A sniper in a church tower. Second shot. Down. The room erupted in murmurs, but Whitmore kept going. They didn't understand what was happening. Nobody expects to be shot from that angle. I moved through them like a scythe. Third. Fourth. Fifth. Callum was feeding me positions, calculating wind, and I was just breathing and squeezing. 8 minutes. 11 Germans. 11 less rifles killing our boys. He stopped, his eyes distant, seeing something the rest of them couldn't. If you're sitting here tonight thinking about the decisions you made in combat, the shots you took or didn't take, maybe you understand why I'm telling you this story. Whitmore looked directly into the eyes of the veterans before him. If you're with me so far, if you want to know what happened next, I hope you'll come back next week. Because the hardest part wasn't pulling those triggers. The hardest part was what came after. When the shooting stopped, the silence was worse than the gunfire. Whitmore's voice had dropped to almost a whisper, and the 47 veterans in that room barely breathed. I stayed in that position for another 2 minutes, scanning for targets. But the Germans who were left had retreated. Our boys started moving, securing positions, pulling wounded to safety. We'd turned the tide. Callum grabbed my shoulder and pulled me up. His face was white as chalk, covered in brick dust and powder residue. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. We made our way to where Lieutenant Prescott was being treated by a medic. The lieutenant's leg was tourniquet. His face gray from blood loss, but his eyes were sharp. He watched me approach and I could see he knew. Everyone knew. Whitmore paused, taking a shaky breath. I stood at attention, waited for him to speak. The battlefield was chaos around us. Men shouting, wounded crying out, but in that moment it was just me and him. Prescott stared at me for what felt like an hour. Then he said, "How many?" 11, sir, I answered. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was something different there. Not anger, something else. You disobeyed a direct order, Private Whitmore. Yes, sir. You used a position I explicitly forbade. Yes, sir. The medic was wrapping Prescott's leg, but the lieutenant waved him off impatiently, keeping his eyes locked on mine. You saved 40 lives today. Maybe more. He looked at the carnage around us, at the boys who were still breathing because of what I'd done. Then he looked back at me. And you put me in an impossible position. Tommy interrupted from his seat. What did he mean? Whitmore turned to him. He meant that by regulations he should court-martial me. But by any measure of human decency, what I did was right. He was a good officer, Prescott. He understood that war isn't fought from a manual. But he also understood that discipline holds an army together. So what happened? Marcus asked. Whitmore's lips formed a thin smile, but there was no humor in it. He promoted me to Lance Corporal, right there in the street with bodies still cooling around us. Then he assigned me to train every sniper in the battalion on the mill wheel position. Made it official doctrine. The room erupted in applause, but Whitmore raised his hand, his expression darkening. Wait, you don't understand. That's not the end. The applause died. 2 weeks later, we were in another engagement outside Cologne. Callum and I were separated from our unit. He was spotting for me from a different position, about 50 yards away. German patrol came through. He tried to use the mill wheel position. Whitmore's voice broke. He didn't brace properly, didn't have the right angle. The recoil threw off his shot, and the noise gave away his position. They killed him before I could get there. The silence in the room was absolute. My best friend died trying to copy what I'd done. Died because I'd made it look easy. Because after Hirschberg, everyone wanted to be the hero with the fancy shooting position. I carried Callum's body back to camp myself. Wouldn't let anyone else touch him. Whitmore's voice was steady now, but his eyes glistened in the fluorescent lights of the Veterans Hall. Lieutenant Prescott found me that night, sitting outside the medical tent where they'd taken Callum. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down next to me in the mud. After a long time, he spoke. "This isn't your fault," he said. I told him he was wrong. Told him that I'd created something dangerous, that I'd been arrogant, that Callum died because of my ego. Prescott grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. He said, "Callum died because war is chaos and good men die in chaos. You didn't invent improvisation, Whitmore. Soldiers have been adapting since the first caveman picked up a rock. What you did at Hirschberg was brilliant. What happened to Ross was tragedy. Don't confuse the two." Whitmore looked around the room at the faces watching him. But I did confuse them. For 70 years, I confused them. I stopped teaching the mill wheel position. Stopped talking about Hirschberg. When the war ended, I went home to Yorkshire, married my sweetheart, ran a hardware store, and never spoke about any of it. "Why tell us now?" Tommy asked quietly. "Because 3 months ago, my granddaughter showed me something on her phone. A video of a young Marine talking about the guilt he carried from shots he didn't take in Fallujah. The rules that stopped him from acting when his instincts screamed at him to move." Whitmore pointed at Tommy. "It was you. Your video." And I realized I'd learned the wrong lesson from Callum's death. The room was utterly silent. The lesson wasn't that innovation is dangerous. The lesson was that innovation requires training, discipline, and understanding your limitations. Callum died because he tried something in desperation without mastering it first. That's not the fault of the technique. That's the fog of war. He moved to the center of the room now, standing stronger than he had all night. What I did at Hirschberg wasn't wrong. Prescott understood that. He made it doctrine because doctrine should evolve based on reality, not tradition. The mill wheel position saved lives. Many lives. Not just that day, but in the weeks after when properly trained snipers used it correctly. Marcus stood up. "So what are you saying to us?" Whitmore turned to face all of them. "I'm saying that the rules exist for good reasons, but they're not sacred scripture. I'm saying that your training is a foundation, not a prison. I'm saying that when you second-guess the choices you made in combat, when you lie awake wondering if you should have acted differently, you need to ask yourself one question. Did I make the best decision I could with the information I had?" He looked directly at Tommy. "If the answer is yes, then you did your job. The guilt you carry isn't justice. It's just pain. And pain without purpose destroys you from the inside." Tommy's eyes were wet now, and he wasn't the only one. Prescott told me something else that night in the mud. He said, "We teach doctrine so soldiers don't have to think in every moment. But we train warriors so they know when to stop following and start leading." 6 months later, the Veterans Hall in Portland looked different. The walls that had been bare now displayed photos, medals, and stories. The Monday night meetings that once drew 23 tired souls now regularly hosted over 100 veterans from across New England. James Whitmore sat in his usual chair, though he needed a cane now to get there. His granddaughter Emma accompanied him most weeks, sitting in the back and watching her grandfather with pride she'd never quite understood before. Tommy Reeves stood at the front of the room, addressing the crowd. He looked different too. Cleaner, steadier. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes for years had faded, replaced by something that resembled peace. "I wanted to share something with you all tonight," Tommy said. "Last month, I started volunteering at a youth center in Lewiston, teaching kids about leadership, discipline, responsibility. And last week, one of them asked me if I'd ever been scared. The room listened. I told him the truth. I said I was scared every single day in Afghanistan. Scared of making the wrong call. Scared of getting my brothers killed. Scared that following orders might cost lives. And scared that breaking them might too. Tommy looked at Whitmore. But then I told him what an old British sniper once told me. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting yourself enough to act despite it. It's knowing that you trained for the chaos, that your instincts matter, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust your own judgment. Whitmore nodded slowly, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. After the meeting, as veterans lined up to shake Whitmore's hand and share their own stories, Marcus pulled him aside. You know what you've done here, don't you? Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Told an old war story? Marcus shook his head. You gave 70 years of wisdom to men who thought they were broken. You showed them that questioning yourself doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And you taught them that the rules that nearly destroyed you can be the same rules that save someone else, if we're willing to examine them honestly. Whitmore looked around the room, at the veterans laughing together, sharing stories, carrying each other's burdens the way soldiers always had. Callum would have liked this, he said quietly. He always said the war wouldn't end for us when the shooting stopped, that we'd carry it forever. But he also believed we could carry it together. Emma approached, touching her grandfather's shoulder. Ready to go home, Grandpa? He stood slowly, leaning on his cane. As they walked toward the door, Tommy called out, Same time next week, Mr. Whitmore? The old sniper turned back, his eyes bright. Wouldn't miss it, son. As they stepped into the cool Maine evening, Emma squeezed her grandfather's arm. I'm proud of you, she said, for finally telling your story. James Whitmore looked up at the stars, the same stars that had hung over Hirschberg 80 years ago. I'm proud of them, he replied. Every single one of them. They came home carrying impossible weight, and they're still standing. That's the real story worth telling. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If James Whitmore's journey moved you, if it made you think about the rules we follow and the instincts we trust, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. What rules have you questioned in your own life? What decisions still keep you up at night? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what story you'd like to hear next. These stories matter. Your stories matter. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is share them. Until next time.